Oh, howdy all, grab yourself a drink, it is time for some PathOfExile discussion. Today I wanted to take my listing of the top 10 maps of patch 3.22, going through what they are and why they've been added onto this list. We're going to be looking at Divination card drops, we're going to be looking at top layouts, and we're also going to be looking at Atlas synergies here. So let's just start with the top 10 list itself. And firstly, in a tier of its own is Crimson Temple. After that, we have 5 maps that come in positions 2 to 6, Haunted Mansion, Beach, Dunes, Cemetery, and Tropical Island. And then after that, we have a third clumping, positions 7 to 10, Atoll, Tower, Mesa, and Shore. So that's what the maps are, but let's talk about why they're on here. Firstly, there's a couple of big changes from patch 3.21. There were 2 new Divination cards added to the game in patch 3.22. One of them has been a small factor, one of them has been a major one. Let's talk about the small factor first, and that is Fire of Unknown Origin. This drops in Academy and Residence maps, and it is drop restricted to item level 81 plus loot. So this means that any monster can drop it in a tier 14 and above map. Tier 13 maps, it's magic and above monsters, and tier 12 maps, it can drop from unique monsters and also from rare monsters. Fire of Unknown Origin isn't being widely farmed, and there's a fairly good reason for that. That's because grinding gear games don't really pay attention to the player-based secondary market for items before deciding what rarity to make them. Instead, they decide how special they want the item to be. And they've decided that Nimbus should be 2 to 3 times more accessible than Mageblood. Unfortunately, for those of you that like Academy and Residence maps though, the player base has decided that Mageblood is something like 25 times as valuable as Nimbus at the moment. And that means that while this Divination card is about 4 times as common as the Apothecary, it is massively, massively, massively cheaper than it, and as a result, people would just rather farm the Apothecary instead. Likewise, Fire of Unknown Origin seems to be about 50 times as rare as the next Divination card we'll discuss, but only about 10 times the value. Let's get on to that other Divination card though, because this has been a big one, the Fortunate. This is a very big deal, this card. Of the best cards to farm in the game, it is the most common of them by far. This card seems to be about 60 to 80% more common than the Patient, and as a result, it's something that, whilst it's not super common, it's not like it drops every single map without juicing, it's something that you will find a fair number of in a play session if you farm for them. You're probably familiar with the most common Divination card in the game, Reign of Chaos, so named because it just rains all over the place when you're running those maps. This Divination card seems to be between 80 and 100 times as rare as Reign of Chaos, and as a result, you know how quick it is to farm 100 Reign of Chaos if you happen to want them. That's how long it's going to take you on average to farm 1 copy of the Fortunate. This card drops in nature-themed areas that are sunny. So this is Tropical Island, Mineral Pools, Plateau, Dunes, Mesa, Atoll, Estuary, Arid Lake, Leyline, Beach, Marshes, Peninsula, Self-Events, Shore, Terrace, Caldera, and Orchid that are on the Atlas this league, but also a number of maps that you might have access to in 3.23 but don't have access to now. These are Canyon, Ancient City, Fields, Jungle Valley, Desert Spring, Dry Sea, Crater, Desert, and Burial Chambers. All of these maps now have a good Divination card. Now you'll notice that I mentioned Burial Chambers there. Burial Chambers isn't something you can farm in patch 3.22, but these changes are going to be a big deal for it in 3.23. And that's because Burial Chambers now has a couple of the best Divination cards in the game. It's got a Divine Orb card and a Headhunter card. Unfortunately, it's not on the Atlas in 3.22, so this means that you can't get Burial Chambers maps at all in patch 3.22. But if you're playing in Standard and you happen to already own some Burial Chambers maps from previous leagues, you can run them there. The problem for Standard enjoyers though is that maps that aren't on the Atlas, such as Burial Chambers, don't benefit from your Atlas passive tree. Now, if current drop rate estimates are right, and sometimes these can be a little bit off, this will make Burial Chambers one of the very best maps in the game for Divination cards whenever it's on the Atlas in future. In fact, it will become better than Crimson Temple, which is the current number 1 map, at any point where 6 Magebloods plus a mirror adds up to less wealth than 6 Headhunters plus 840 Divine Orbs. Again, this is based on the current estimates of the drop rates of these cards. Could be out by a little bit, but that should give you a bit of a sense. That's not usually the case, but it sometimes is. In any case, Burial Chambers is a better tile set than Crimson Temple, and so I think that if it is back on the Atlas next league, it is going to be an exceedingly popular map to run. The top 4 Divination card categories to farm at the moment, at current Trade League prices and factoring in the relative abundance of these cards, are the Apothecary in position 1 in a league of its own, miles ahead of everything else. Then you have the clean Headhunter Divination cards in 2nd place. So this is the Doctor, the Nurse, and the Patient. Then just behind them in 3rd place, you have the Divine Orb cards that don't come from map bosses. So this is the Fortunate, this is Brother's Gift. And then in 4th place, quite some way below the Divine Orb cards, you have the 2 Mirror Shard cards. These are 7 Years Bad Luck and also Unrequited Love. Now, if Headhunter falls below 140 Divines, that's going to be the trigger for positions 2 and 3 on this list swapping. and if Headhunter falls below 1/7 of a mirror, which may or may not happen in the entire league, then in that case, the Headhunter cards are going to move another step down on this list. Both of these are often likely to happen, but at the time I'm recording this video, this is the ordering of those Divination cards once you factor in how rare they are. So where does that leave our Divination card maps? In S tier, we have Crimson Temple high and above everything else in this league. Now, Crimson Temple and Defiled Cathedral have the same Divination cards, or at least all the same ones that matter, but there's a little difference there, and that is that Defiled Cathedral is not on the Atlas this league. So Crimson Temple is in a world of its own here with the number 1 Divination card in the Apothecary, plus one of the cards tied for number 4 in 7 Years Bad Luck. In second position, we have Haunted Mansion and also Crimson Township, which is not on the Atlas, and also level with Haunted Mansion at the moment would be Burial Chambers if that were available, but it's not available. So that is your S tier Divination card maps. Crimson Temple as S+, and then Haunted Mansion in just generic S, with the 3 maps that are not on the Atlas, Burial Chambers, Crimson Township, and Defiled Cathedral, also being part of this S tier, but not being options for you to run. These are the reasons that Crimson Temple and Haunted Mansion take up positions numbers 1 and 2 on my listing of the top 10 maps of this league. Your A tier Divination card maps, which are quite a bit lower than the S tier ones, something like half as good, are any map that has a clean Headhunter card. So this means Doctor, Nurse, and Patient. It does not include the Fiend, it does not include the Demon, or any map that has a tileset based Divination card drop. So the full list of these maps: Carcass, Cells, Tower, Phantasmagoria, Spider Forest, Colonnade, Promenade, Cemetery, Tropical Island, Mineral Pools, Plateau, Dunes, Mesa, Atoll, Estuary, Arid Lake, Leyline, Beach, Marshes, Peninsula, Self-Events, Shore, Terrace, Caldera, and Orchid. AKA a lot, and this list is a lot longer than it would have been if you'd asked me to put together this same list last league when we didn't have the fortunate. So I thought I should mention a quick aside about the Divination cards that drop only from map bosses and that award Divine Orbs, because these can seem like a really good deal to chase at first, but they end up underperforming your expectations. The 2 Divination cards in question are the Sephiroth and Divine Beauty, and these drop from map bosses that are based upon Dominus for the Sephiroth or based upon Merveil for Divine Beauty. Now, these Divination cards are just much worse than they look, and that's because you can't juice them via as many means. They don't seem to care about the number of Divination Scarabs that you might be applying to your map. They don't seem to care about all sorts of other things. Really, they only care whether or not the map is twinned. These are a nice little bonus on the maps that they exist on, but they're not something that is strong enough of a bonus to pull you into running these maps. Additionally, Mineral Pools has both the Fortunate and Divine Beauty, but it is such an awful tile set, such an absolutely terrible tile set, that there is no way I would run it, even if it had the Apothecary on top of the Divination cards it's got. What about considerations though that aren't Divination cards? Layout of tile sets matters a lot, especially for some mechanics like Legion, which is way better in wide open areas where there's just more space for monsters to spawn, or Blight, which is way better in narrow spaces and particularly good in narrow dead ends, or Expedition, which is in a lot of ways the opposite of Blight. You don't want it to be in a narrow dead end. You definitely don't want an Expedition to spawn on a map like Waterways, where there's some very narrow passages. If you get one to spawn in a narrow passage, it ends up being pretty mediocre. On top of that, some map layouts are just faster than others, and also there are some mechanics you might be interested in running, and I particularly want to call out Heist here as an example of this, that make it so that you want to visit all corners of the map. Heist in particular, because if you've got a Heist Atlas, each individual smuggler's cache that you open is going to be better than the one before it on average, and as a result you want to find every single smuggler's cache that's on the map, and that means you want to visit every single corner of the map. Ritual is similar as well. Ritual, you want to visit every corner of the map, so you want a predictable layout that is reasonably easy to traverse if you're running one of those types of mechanics. There is also the question of manipulating your Eldritch altars. You can boss rush on some particular maps, which can then change which altars are eligible to spawn on your map. So a quick recap of how Eldritch altars work. There are 3 different categories of mods that can spawn on them. There are ones that modify Eldritch minions, there are ones that modify the map boss, and there are ones that modify the player in some way. Broadly speaking, the Eldritch minion modifying ones tend to be the best of these, and as a result, if you can rig the odds in your favour to get more Eldritch minion ones, that makes all of your altars better. The way that you do this is either by killing the map boss as soon as possible, which is something that you can do very effectively on Mesa map, or on 2 specific maps. These are Mausoleum, which is on the Atlas, and Jungle Valley, which is not on the Atlas in 3.22. What you can do is you can just enter the map, and the map boss doesn't spawn until you enter its room. And so in these particular maps, you will never get a boss affecting altar unless you go out of your way to cause one to spawn. Ultimately, what this means is that for the purposes of Eldritch Altars, the number 1 map on this current atlas is Mausoleum. And the number 2, not all that far behind, is Mesa, where the boss is in a very predictable location and you can go straight there. Taking that into account isn't quite going to be enough to get Mausoleum onto our top 10 maps, but it is going to be enough to push Mesa in there. The reason that Mesa gets the nod over Mausoleum is that Mesa has better Divination cards, Mesa has the Fortunate, and the Fortunate is an extremely good Divination card. An A-tier Divination card and being second best in the game at a particular important strategy is enough to get on the top 10 list. So let's go through the top 10 again and why. Crimson Temple first because it has the best Divination cards in the game by far, and Haunted Mansion in second place because it still has the Apothecary. It loses 7 years bad luck, but it's still a fine map. I'm putting Dunes, Beach, Cemetery, and Tropical Island all roughly near each other because each of them has a single A-tier Divination card. This is the Fortunate for most of them. Cemetery has Brother's Gift instead. And on top of that, they all have a smooth layout and one that works well in conjunction with a lot of mechanics. Tropical Island shines brightest when you're running Delirium, i.e. when nothing can shine at all. Cemetery actually is the best of the A-tier maps for Divination cards because as well as having Brother's Gift, it also has the much less valuable Brother's Stash, which is a nice little bonus the rare times that it shows up. It's only equal in rarity to Brother's Gift, so it's not like it's some massive bonus. It's not like there's a common Divination card that's adding a bunch of extra wealth, but that's something that's significant to have as a bonus. And then you've got Dunes, which is phenomenal for Legion, and Beach, which is just good at pretty much everything. Beyond that, we have Atoll, Tower, Mesa, and Shore. All of them have an A-tier Divination card, and they're all just a diverse selection of different layouts. Atoll is the most predictable of all the layouts. Tower is there to give Blight enjoyers a little bit of love because it is quite a good map for Blight. We've already discussed why Mesa makes the list, and Shore essentially is Beach or Dunes, but just a little bit worse than them. That said, there's a lot of other maps that are not far behind this list as well, so there's plenty of different things that you can play around with, and if like me you're someone that doesn't like spending all your time running the same tile set, one thing you can do is you can just favourite each of these 10 maps once each, then favourite your personal favourite of them another 2 times, and that way you're pretty much only going to be running these 10 maps, but you are going to be shifting around between them. And if one of them is actively bad for your mapping strategy, so in my case Atoll is pretty bad with Expedition, then you can always just leave that one out. Anyways, that's all I've got for today. May your Divination card drops be fortunate, and I will see you around.